huge amount of room. Buying them is cheap, big open floor space. But unless you have a lot of money, count on this thing sucking you dry. All right, everyone, welcome back to my next video. Today I'm here with my good friend Brian to talk to you about which vehicle to buy. There are a lot more considerations than you might think. And between Brian and I, we've got a really broad experience. So what has been your experience living on the road? How long have you lived on the road?
So I've been on the road for 14 years, and in the entire time I've mostly been in my 23-foot Class C motorhome. It's a late model, 1977, but I've also spent plenty of time in my car with a tent, and in a van, and in a trailer. So usually a month or two at a time. So I have some experiences in that as well.
Right. So Brian is much more of an expert on RVs because I've never lived in an RV. And I've been in a lot of different vehicles. You know, I've been in a box van, a pickup, a cargo trailer. So I've been in a few things. So I think between us, we've really got a really sound basis to discuss these things. Okay, now we're going to talk about specific vehicles, and on some of them I will have more experience and will make more comments, and on some Brian will have a lot more experience and will make more comments. So let's start right at the bottom. For me, it's a car. Have you ever lived in a car?
I have. I've taken my Ford Festiva and my Geo Tracker down to Mexico for 2 months at a time, and I'm sleeping in a tent on the beach, setting up an outdoor kitchen. And so I have had a lot of experience with that. And the pro of it is that you get amazing gas mileage. You can zip around anywhere you want. You don't have to worry about it. You're super nimble. Those are things that are great. The other thing is that most of us already own a car. So the entry point into getting into a car is very cheap because you probably already own a car, or if not, you can buy them very cheap. So that's been my experience with it. The downside is obviously space and some other things.
Right, you're zero comfort.
Zero comfort, absolutely.
But a big thing that everyone needs to consider is if you're paying rent now, and most of us are, if you're paying $800, $1,000, $1,500 a month in rent, if you move into your car, for example, you have a good, reliable car now. If you can live in that car, you start paying yourself that rent, you can build your money up and buy the vehicle that was perfect for you, whatever that may be. So that's one of the key points to understand is you can see your first vehicle as temporary. This is a stopgap until I can save for whatever I want.
And I think that's a very smart idea. Again, using what you have until you can afford something better with that emergency fund as well.
And both, yes, you got to have both. And you mentioned tent, and I think a car in itself is not very comfortable, but a car and a good tent can be amazing.
It can. You can really spread your stuff out. You can feel more at home. You can use the restroom in there. There are a lot of bonuses to having a tent set up outside. If you're considering being stealth in the city, though, which a car is great for stealth, but you can't have those extra things. It's going to be a little more difficult to enjoy those. You're going to be going to coffee shops, which when you go to coffee shops, you're probably going to spend more money. You're not going to be able to cook as easily in the city. You're going to spend more money.
That's what I found too. I lived in the city for my first 6 years and I spent a lot more money.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the next vehicle I think we should give thought to is an SUV, kind of like your Tracker. It's a very teeny tiny SUV.
Teeny tiny, yeah.
But it is an SUV.
It is.
And they range in size from teeny tiny to a Jeep is an SUV essentially, and that will take you deep into the backcountry and give you zero comfort. But you can move up to something like a Suburban or an Expedition. And then you've got a surprising amount of comfort and a surprising amount of backcountry ability, but really poor gas mileage. So SUVs can work too.
Absolutely, because you can set up a bed inside of them. You have enough room for storage. Some of the conveniences, you can drop the tailgate, do your cooking there. So it can be very easy to do, and it really opens it up. It is definitely a step up from just being in a car.
Absolutely, and to my mind, it's a big step, and it finds a much better balance than a car of back road ability and freedom, except you're going to get poor gas mileage. I mean, well, now your Tracker, your teeny tiny little Tracker,
teeny tiny, yes,
gets great gas mileage.
It does, but even a Suburban getting 15 miles per gallon, we'd say that's not horrible. It's not great, but when you compare it to some of their other options, it's kind of middle of the road, I feel like.
So next, let's think about minivans. Have you ever been a minivan?
I have not. Have you?
I never have either.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people who are living in their minivans, and again, it's just a step upward. You can get them all-wheel drive, and you got a lot more room, a lot more comfort.
Absolutely. You can sit up better in it. It's just built out more so that you have a little more height to it inside, and so much more than a Suburban, you know, and a car. So I think the minivan is a good compromise because, again, you can still get into them pretty cheap. I know they've gone up in price, but they're still relatively cheap to buy. And so I think that that's a really good option for people because it does expand on that car with a lot more features.
A lot more features. One of the big things to consider is, you know, when the weather's good, it's not too bad being inside a rig, but when the weather's bad, it's kind of a bad weather we're having here. You're stuck inside your rig, and I would a whole lot rather be stuck inside a minivan than any car, or even most SUVs.
Absolutely.
Next, we're going to consider a van, and we're going to kind of, as a side discussion, high-top vans, because that makes a big difference in comfort. And you've not lived in a van.
I have for a month. Yep, I was traveling with another person, and we traveled in just a standard van. It was not a high top. And after that month in the van, there were certain things that I came away from that saying, I have to have these in a future vehicle. And they were, I have to be able to stand up. I had a really difficult time not being able to stand up, putting my pants on. We didn't have refrigeration, nor did we have a restroom. And those three things were very important to me. I didn't like having to go to a coffee shop to use the restroom. I wanted to use it when I needed it. And so that particular van, if you're gonna go with a van, I really think the high top is the way to go. There are some negatives to that, less clearance, you get worse gas mileage, but I think that there are a lot of positives to that.
Right. Oh, and I should have thrown in four-wheel drive van, because that is, gas mileage goes down, cost to keep it running, but that's a pretty sweet spot there.
It is. And you've lived in a van, so what's your experience?
I didn't mind living in a low top. I got pretty used to that. But I've owned a lot of high top rigs. My ambulance is a high top now. And it is infinitely better if you can stand, no question about it. For example, I was living in a van, and then I put a high top on it. It was expensive, but boy, it was worth it. Yeah, I agree, absolutely. So if you have the money, you can buy a good, reliable van and then put a high top on it. Or you can buy now the new Transit Sprinters, Pro Masters. They're going to come. You can get them with a high top from the factory, and they are very comfortable.
They are. And I really think going, you know, the next step up from the minivan to the van, that's actually a pretty big jump in comfort.
Big jump.
Yeah, you get a lot more conveniences. You get less gas mileage, of course, but you have usually more ground clearance, so you can go further in with some good set of tires. You can go to a lot of places, even if you don't have four-wheel drive. And I think that that's very important.
In my mind, I've said all along, the van, whether it's a low top Chevy or Ford or Dodge or the new high tops, whichever one, it's the sweet spot between all, it's the balance of freedom and comfort. It's a master of none, acceptable at all. That's
Absolutely.
kind of how I would describe it.
Yep, I would completely agree.
You move up into the Ram, the ProMaster Sprinter, then they become pretty darn good at comfort.
They are. They're almost to the level of an RV at that point. So.
They are. Well, they can be.
Certainly.
And then we want to include trucks in here. Trucks with a shell or a truck with a slide-in camper. The shell's not very comfortable, but I know a lot of people that live in pickups with shells, and some of them just absolutely love it, and some do it because they have to, and it's okay. To my mind, what I would consider the best is a pickup, full drive pickup, with a high shell. So I could almost stand up in it, and I had one of those once, and I do kind of look at it as the best balance for me. So have you got any experience with?
I don't, but I will add that the shell, I mean, you're talking very lightweight, so you're going to get better gas mileage with the truck versus putting a slide-in truck camper. Right. Those are very heavy, a lot more drag. With the shell, the entry point is so cheap, and you can build it out kind of like a Suburban almost.
Yeah.
So I think that is an option. If money is tight and you want to get better gas mileage, that could be the way to go.
Also, pickups are a dime a dozen.
They are.
They are everywhere, whereas vans, because of van life, have become pretty hard to find.
They are.
And the prices have gone up because they're hard to find, supply and demand. So the big, huge 800-pound gorilla in the room is with the shell is you've got to get it. Most of us have to get out and walk around to get in. and that's a safety issue. But that's, you know, in your class C, you don't have that because you can just jump right in.
Correct.
But was that a consideration when you bought it?
It was. I wanted to be able to park somewhere and just go right to the back. Even though I rarely do, because there's stuff there, I always walk it around. But I like that option of if something disturbed me in the middle of the night, I could also just turn the key without going outside and bolt. And I like that option. Has that ever happened in 14 years? Not a once. But at that point, early in my tenure as a nomadic dweller, that was very important to me.
Right. Well, now you know all you know. You got to buy a new rig.
Mm-hmm.
Would you take that into consideration now?
Yeah, it would be less of a consideration. It would not be as important to me. I have some other things that are more important that would take precedent over that.
Okay, so pickups with shells. They're more available. They're going to be a little cheaper. Commonly available in four-wheel drive. Not very comfortable. You get a slide in. Very comfortable. More money, worse gas mileage. You have to go around in either. And so then another vehicle you might consider is a commercial vehicle. So today I live in an ambulance. So that was a commercial vehicle that I am now using as a private residence. So that's an example of a commercial vehicle. Another one was a box van. So my box van was being used as a delivery van when I bought it. And I loved living in the box van. I love living in the ambulance. So there's two examples of commercial vehicles that I have lived in. Brian, can you think of any others?
Those are the ones that I always think of, like the U-Haul trucks, things like that. And the cool thing about those is that they're usually square. Mm-hmm. So they're a lot easier to build out. So the planning, the construction of them is so much easier. And it has a lot of the things you already need. It has a strong engine, usually a big engine. So I think that those are a really cool option.
And there's also schoolies and shuttle buses.
Absolutely. You know, when you get into schoolie, you're getting into a little difficulty in building them out, maintaining them. Getting someone to work on a school bus is always going to be a little more difficult versus if you're at a car, a van, things like that. Mechanically, they're just a vehicle, whereas a school bus is more of a specialty item. Same thing with motorhomes, things like that. So that is something to consider. But yeah, again, repurposed commercial vehicles is a great option. You can sometimes get a really good deal on those.
Right. Now, I'm going to make a lot of you mad and say I don't recommend schoolies at all. I have known a lot of people with schoolies who have just poured money into it. If you have the money, then that's fine. You get a huge amount of room. Buying them is cheap. Big open floor space. But unless you have a lot of money, count on this thing sucking you dry. They burn a lot of money, and I don't really understand that. They're commercial vehicles. They're made to drive 1 million miles, but they're made to drive 1 million miles in a shop with the mechanic who's right there. You got a problem, you pull it in the shop, the mechanic fixes it. You're paying him 40 hours a week no matter what. It's just another work he does. You and I aren't like that. We have no abilities. Most of us have no abilities to work on a schoolie. They're big commercial diesel engines usually. It's hard to find someone else, and when we do find someone else to work on it, it's going to be very, very expensive. They're premium priced. So, and they're going to need a lot of repairs. I drove schoolie for 5 years. I drove school bus, and yeah, and these were old gas engines. That was a long time ago, and they needed regular repairs. They went into the shop all the time. While I was in the shop, we traded out, so we had a fleet of standby. And you don't have a fleet of standby. Just your schoolie breaks down, you're stuck, and they will break down. You will be doing repairs. I don't recommend schoolies. I only recommend vehicles with a standard drivetrain. So a Chevy Express type or a Ford type. If it's just built on a Chevy platform with a standard Chevy V8 transmission, or a Ford V8 or Dodge V8, then I think you're okay there because you can get that fixed anywhere. It's no big deal. So my personal opinion is don't buy any of the commercial vehicles, even the step vans. Step vans, one we didn't mention. Both the box van I had a Chevy 350. I could get that fixed anywhere in the world for cheap. And my ambulance has it's a Chevy. It has the Duramax, and I can get that fixed anywhere in the world. And I wouldn't have chosen it. I would have avoided the diesel if I possibly could have, and would still, more so today, having driven it for a while. That might make you mad, but my recommend is you all stay away from any commercial vehicle that has a commercial drivetrain.
One thing I'll add about the schoolie is if you're going for the cool factor and you have a ton of money, do it. If they're awesome, they're super cool, but they are a lot of work to build out, very expensive to build out, and as Bob said, it'll really get you with the repairs and the maintenance and so forth. Again, cool factor, great. If you have tons of money, good for you, awesome. But for most of us, it's not very practical. So you talked about, trucks are very cheap to purchase, especially compared to vans. The next transition for me would be adding a trailer to that truck. And I've lived a couple months in a trailer at a time. And I have to say, to me, that might be the ideal situation. Because with my motorhome, if the engine goes out, I have to replace that engine, otherwise I lose my home. Everything's invested in that one box. Whereas if the truck engine goes bad, I keep my home, my trailer stays the same, I just get a different tow vehicle. And so I think there's a lot of benefits to having the truck trailer combo. Plus with the truck, you're more nimble, you can drop the trailer, go into town, go to the backcountry, go to trailheads. You have so many options with that truck trailer combination that I think that that's a good option for some people. Zero stealth, people, if you are hooked up on a city street, they know you're sleeping in it. And so certain things you're not good for, but I think a trailer is a good option.
Well, remember too that there are other kinds of trailers beyond
True.
just the travel trailer. So I owned a cargo trailer, and you do have the stealth.
You do, that's true.
Yeah, you can park that in a commercial district. A truck and a cargo trailer looks just fine. Might be one of the better stealths you can do. You get a lot of comfort, and if you want to do a full, you get the travel trailer if you want full comfort, and if you want the minimum comfort, and that's what I wanted, you get a cargo trailer and just build it however you want it. However, you lose a lot of freedom.
You do. The flexibility of it is going around town, things like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And going into the backcountry.
Yes.
I would never just pull down a road, a forest road or a desert road. I would always park and walk, make sure I could get in and out.
Yep.
I don't want to be on a real curvy road and have to back that thing out all the way if I hit a dead end, a tree across the road. So you lose a lot of freedom. What I did with my cargo trailer for a while was I drove it in the winter. I spent all winter in it. I parked it and then took off in the summer. And I found that a really good balance of comfort in the winter when I didn't travel much and nearly total freedom in the summer.
And the other downside of trailers is that there is more setup.
Yep.
You have to hook up, you have to put the stabilizing bars on. There's some complexity there that just adds extra stuff. There's just a lot of things to hook up and a lot of things you have to think about for the process, so it's not just turning the key and going, which is the downside.
Right, I agree completely, yeah. In fact, for myself, I decided that I had a van, I had a 1-ton van, extended van, it was huge, and the cargo trailer. And what I found was I accumulated so much stuff. I wasn't living below my means. Mm-hmm. That was where I went wrong. I had more room, I filled it.
Yes.
And I got really tired of that. The moving factor was huge,
yeah.
And I got rid of it just because of that. I didn't want to have to spend a whole day breaking camp so I could leave the next day.
Yep.
And that's where I ended up. But there's another option for trailers, beyond the travel trailers, cargo trailers. There are teardrop trailers. Now, for some reason, manufacturers of teardrop trailers all think they're worth $100,000. That's an exaggeration, but man, they are expensive. Can't imagine it. But you can buy a pretty cheap teardrop style trailer. For example, the Runaway out of Florida. They were $3,000 for a very long time, and now they've gone up to, I believe, $5,000 or $6,000. But you can tow that with any car. If you have a V6 in any vehicle with a V6, should be able to tow that. It's like 600 pounds. It's really, really light. You can even build your own if you have the skills, the time, and the money, tools. But most of us won't do that. But like the Runaway, that is really an excellent choice, right? You get a lot of comfort, but light, you're still in your car.
And you can go further in the backcountry. They're lighter weight. You can usually flip the axles. They have higher clearance. You can get further in. The downside is that many of them, the cooking systems are on the outside. Right. So really the inside is just a bed and a couple of storage containers, but the outside is where you do your cooking. So if you're in inclement weather, may not be the best choice. Anything where you can't function unless you are outside is always going to be tougher to do. And so just keep that in mind. Again, that goes back to the comfort thing. I want to be able to cook a meal and not worry about sitting in the rain and, you know, hiding from that.
So it's all a trade-off, but that is another trade that you can do.
So the next thing, you know, the final thing we're going to talk about is what I'm living in is a motorhome. And again, that goes the gambit. You can have a 19-foot motorhome, or you can have a 40-foot diesel pusher. The comfort level is different throughout it, but they're all going to have that basic sense of comfort that you're going to have running water, you're going to have black water, freshwater tanks, gray water. You're going to have all your systems. It's like living in a home with a furnace, everything like that. So that's the positive of it, is that you do the comfort, creature comforts of living in a home, it's almost identical. I consider it my studio apartment on wheels. Mm-hmm. The downside is maneuverability, going through towns and things like that, much more difficult. The gas mileage is atrocious, you know, for the most part. So these are things you have to consider. If you're gonna get a motorhome, you wanna make sure you have extra money saved or that you have a job, because repairs are more difficult. Even though it's a standard engine in some of those, they're still a motorhome, they're heavier, they don't have a lift that can lift them. A lot of mechanics just don't want to take up room on their lot with a 30-foot motorhome. It takes up the space of 2 or 3 cars. So they're inconvenient to work on, so keep that in mind.
Again, it's just comfort versus freedom. The smaller it is, the less freedom you give up. Mm-hmm. One thing to think about is buying rentals. I bought a van, my last van that I owned had been a rental. A rental company bought it and rented it out. It was just a regular cargo van. But I didn't have any problem with it at all. I really loved it. And so one thing to think about is there are a lot of companies that rent out motorhomes, and they buy these little shorty ones, mm-hmm. 18 feet. And man, that is a sweet spot. It's hard to find the short ones if they're not rentals, really, really hard. But that is a sweet spot. You can get surprisingly good gas mileage out of them. They're easy to drive.
They fit in a standard parking spot.
Yeah, they sure will. And, you know, 18 foot, my van's, regular standard van's 18 foot mm-hmm. or more. And so that's a good sweet spot, but even a used one's going to be quite expensive. And a lot of times with them, the company will also sell you an extended warranty. So they'll give you a year's coverage on the drivetrain or something like that. I don't know the details. So that's a really good choice to consider.
Now, another downside that what I just thought of was that with those more complex systems of like the water system, the furnace, the refrigeration, those are more expenses when they go out. So if you build your own vehicle, you know exactly where all the wiring is, you know what the insulation's like. If something goes wrong in my motorhome, it could be catastrophic. I don't know where all the wires are. I don't know how the systems are exactly plumbed. So you're ripping out a lot of cabinets trying to find those and really get down into the nitty gritty. So although the convenience of those systems are nice, it can really be a downfall if they start going wrong. And they will eventually.
So which one, class A, B, or C? Any thoughts on that? Do you own a C?
I do own a C. I like the C because I sleep above the cab, so the bedroom is then out of the way, so it doesn't take up length. Otherwise, if you have the bed on the ground floor, you're going to go with a longer motorhome or less living space. So I like the class C personally, but they do make some nice class A's that are shorter, which are kind of convenient too. But yeah, I like the class C. Another
big factor on the class C is the normal driving position.
Yes.
Not nearly as hard, I don't think.
No, I feel like I'm just driving in a van because that's what I see in front of me is just a van front end. So it's really no different from that.
And like you found, finding a reasonably priced Class C older is pretty easy.
Yeah, I would agree that you can get into them fairly cheap, relatively speaking, because the miles are all associated with the house, and so they know that it depreciates much faster because of that.
Right, right. And sometimes you think, well, the newer I get it, the better, but that's probably not true anymore.
No, they've really cheapened up on some of the manufacturers, especially. They've really gone and they're using really thin wood, makes it lighter weight, and that's what they're really going for. But you have hinges that are just pulling out of the wall because it's just a little foam board is attached to. So the older motorhomes are typically built better, but in the engine, you can work on a little easier, but there are downsides of that, you know, and so they're heavier. You know, mine is carbureted, so it gets worse gas mileage. So there are certainly downsides.
Yeah. Just, you know, there's all kinds of things, and we've been on the road long enough to have come across a bunch of those. We just want to share them with you. Another we haven't talked about is a Class B. And there was a time when I thought that was the very best possible balance. You know, the old days of the road trek in the 90s and early 2000s. And there were quite a few others. I just think of road trek. There was Pleasure Ways, and there were more. I don't remember them all. But, you know, that was a van that they turned into a motorhome. They did all the work for you. And I've known a lot of people who had really, really good luck with those. And then, of course, today you have the Sprinters, the Transits, and the ProMasters they're turning into Class Bs. And they're so expensive. I mean, any Class B now, new, is 100 grand, 200 grand. I mean, it's phenomenal how much those things cost. But if you can find an older Class B, that's a really sweet spot of comfort and freedom. They're just vans that are already really well built out. So they're packed inside. You know, they're really packed inside. They feel closed in and small to me. Spend some time in the Class B before you consider one. But you can get surprisingly good gas mileage, and they're easy to drive around town. You can't go into the backcountry they're any better, but no worse. That's another one to consider. So just to kind of summarize all this, for me, the sweet spot, for me personally, with my priorities and my desires, that'll be completely different than yours probably, I would say is a four-wheel drive van with a high top. That gives me all the comfort I want. Doesn't give me very good gas mileage, but it gives me all the comfort and back road ability, the two things that I think are really important to me. And Brian, what would you say?
So I agree, the van is a great sweet spot. It gives you a lot of convenience and comforts, but I personally really like the small trailer and a capable truck. So let's say a Toyota 4Runner, just because then you can go further in the backcountry, you have four-wheel drive, and then you can just set up your trailer someplace and go off and exploring. That to me is a really great sweet spot, and I think that might be my next foray into, you know, vehicular dwelling, is that I would probably go with that if I get out of my motorhome.
Right. So there you go. That's our opinions. And again, we want to emphasize over and over and over again, budget first, have an emergency fund, live with below your means, and choose a vehicle that the best, most reliable vehicle you can choose that meets your needs. Thank you, Brian, for coming and sharing your experience.
You're welcome. It was great to be here with you and discussing these different options. I think this is going to be very beneficial for a lot of people out there to help them decide what is the best option for them. And again, there's no perfect solution, but you can get one that most fits your needs and your desires.
Absolutely. So if you got anything out of this video, like us on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit that thumbs up button, and we'll talk to you later. Bye. So what are we looking at next then, Brian?
Sorry, I just burped in the middle of that.
We don't cut those out.
Oh, perfect.